Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. The sky above was painted in a stormy gray as Sir Aemon rode through the forest, the ancient trees looming over him like silent sentinels. His horse's hooves struck the hard earth rhythmically, but inside, his heart beat much faster. The journey had been long, the weight of the task ahead settling deep into his bones. Somewhere in the distance, hidden in the towering peaks of the Dragonspire Mountains, waited the dragons. Aemon didn't know what trials awaited him there, but he knew one thing for certain: failure was not an option. The ancient pact between dragons and humans had kept the peace for centuries, and now that it was crumbling, the world teetered on the brink of chaos. His orders had been clear. He was to be the one to renew the pact, to rekindle the bond that had once united dragons and humans against the forces of darkness. Aemon still couldn't believe he had been chosen. He was young, barely older than 20, and though he had trained as a knight for years, he was far from a seasoned warrior. He had heard the whispers, many thought him too inexperienced for such a task. But the council had made its decision, and now he had no choice but to succeed. The path ahead was treacherous, leading into the heart of the Dragonspire Mountains, where few dared to venture. The jagged peaks were shrouded in mist, and Aemon had heard stories of the creatures that dwelled there, beasts of legend, ancient and terrible. His grip tightened on the reins as he urged his horse forward, determination and fear warring within him. He reached the base of the mountains by nightfall, the towering cliffs casting long shadows across the land. Aemon dismounted, leading his horse to a small clearing where he could set up camp. As the fire crackled and the stars twinkled above, he felt the weight of his mission settle on him fully. Tomorrow, he would face the dragons. Tomorrow, the trials would begin. Sleep was fleeting, his mind filled with visions of fire and shadow. When dawn broke, Aemon packed his gear and continued his journey on foot. The air grew colder as he ascended the mountain, the wind biting at his skin. The path narrowed, winding precariously along steep cliffs, but Aemon pressed on, driven by the knowledge that the future of both his people and the dragons depended on him. After hours of grueling ascent, he reached a plateau. Before him stood an imposing figure, a dragon with scales like molten copper, its eyes glowing like embers. The dragon towered over him, massive wings tucked against its sides, radiating an aura of raw power. "You are the one who seeks to renew the pact," the dragon rumbled, its voice reverberating through the ground. Aemon swallowed hard, his hand instinctively resting on the hilt of his sword. "I am," he replied, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at his insides. The dragon's eyes narrowed, studying him with an intensity that made Aemon feel small and insignificant. "I am Ignather, dragon of fire. You must prove your strength before you can even think of forging an alliance with us." Aemon's heart raced, but he nodded. "I will face your trial." Ignather's massive tail swished across the ground, sending a plume of dust into the air. "Very well. Defend yourself." Without warning, Ignather lunged, flames spewing from his mouth. Aemon barely had time to draw his sword before the searing heat engulfed him. He rolled to the side, narrowly avoiding the torrent of fire, his mind racing as he tried to devise a plan. He couldn't win this fight with brute strength. Ignather was far too powerful. But there had to be another way. The ground beneath him trembled as Ignather's massive claws dug into the earth, the dragon circling him with deadly intent. Aemon's breath came in ragged gasps as he dodged another attack, the heat of the flames licking at his armor. His eyes darted around the plateau, searching for anything he could use to his advantage. That's when he saw it, a stream trickling down from the mountain, the water sparkling in the sunlight. Aemon's mind raced. Fire and water. It was a gamble, but it might be his only chance. He sprinted toward the stream, Ignather's fiery breath scorching the ground behind him. As he reached the water's edge, he spun on his heel, raising his sword high. The dragon lunged again, and Aemon swung his blade, slicing through the air with all his strength. The sword struck the water, sending a spray of droplets toward Ignather's face. The effect was immediate. The water sizzled as it made contact with the dragon's fiery scales, and Ignather recoiled, shaking his massive head in surprise. Aemon didn't waste a second. He pressed the advantage, using the stream to douse the flames as he attacked with a flurry of strikes. The dragon snarled, but Aemon could see the respect growing in its eyes. He wasn't just fighting with brute force, he was using his wits, outsmarting the dragon with strategy. Finally, Ignather stepped back, folding his wings against his sides. "You have passed the test of strength," the dragon said, his voice filled with reluctant admiration. "But there are more trials ahead. Do not grow complacent, knight." Aemon nodded, his chest heaving with exhaustion. "I understand." Ignather gave a rumbling laugh, smoke curling from his nostrils. "Good. The next trial will test your mind. Follow the path, and you will find Valinthra, the dragon of ice and knowledge. She will judge your wisdom." Without another word, Ignather spread his wings and took to the sky, leaving Aemon alone on the plateau. The wind howled around him as he watched the dragon disappear into the clouds, and a sense of unease settled over him. The first trial had been difficult, but he had a feeling the next one would be even harder. Aemon wiped the sweat from his brow and began to climb once more. The air grew colder with each step, and soon he found himself trudging through snow, the path growing slick and treacherous. His muscles ached from the first trial, but he pushed through the pain, determined to complete his mission. After what felt like hours, Aemon reached a frozen lake, its surface shimmering in the pale light of the sun. At the center of the lake sat a dragon, its scales a shimmering blue-white, as if carved from ice. This was Valinthra, the dragon of wisdom. "You seek to renew the pact," Valinthra said, her voice cold and distant, like the wind over the tundra. "I do," Aemon replied, his breath visible in the frigid air. "Then you must prove your wisdom. Solve this riddle, and you will pass the trial." Valinthra's eyes glowed, and her voice became a low chant as she spoke the riddle. "I speak without a mouth, and hear without ears. I have no body, but I come alive with wind. What am I?" Aemon's brow furrowed as he considered the words. The riddle was simple, yet profound. He closed his eyes, thinking back to the stories of the dragons and the ancient pact. The answer was not just about words or logic, it was about understanding the deeper connection between dragons and humans. "An echo," he said finally, opening his eyes. Valinthra's gaze softened, a thin smile playing across her lips. "Correct," she said. "You have passed the test of wisdom. But your greatest challenge still lies ahead. You must now face your own heart." Aemon's stomach twisted at the words, but he nodded. He had known this trial would come. The final test would be the hardest of all. "Follow the path to the Cave of Shadows," Valinthra said, her voice now a mere whisper in the cold air. "There, you will face Tenebris, the dragon of shadows. Only by conquering your fear will you succeed." Aemon thanked Valinthra and began the final leg of his journey. The path was dark and steep, leading deep into the mountains. The air grew thick with a sense of foreboding, and the shadows seemed to stretch and twist, as if alive. Every step felt heavier than the last, his heart pounding in his chest. At last, he reached the entrance to the cave, its mouth yawning open like the maw of some great beast. Aemon hesitated for a moment, his breath catching in his throat. But then he stepped inside, the darkness swallowing him whole. The air in the cave was thick and oppressive, pressing down on him like a weight. Aemon could barely see his hand in front of his face, but he pressed on, the sound of his footsteps echoing through the cavern. As he walked, the shadows seemed to shift, forming shapes at the edges of his vision. Suddenly, a voice whispered through the darkness, low and insidious. "You are not worthy, knight. You will fail, as all before you have failed." Aemon's heart raced as the shadows closed in around him, forming figures, twisted, dark versions of people he knew. His father, his fellow knights, even the elders of the council, all sneered at him, their faces twisted in contempt. "You are weak," the shadows whispered. "You will never succeed. You are not fit to carry the weight of the pact." Aemon's knees buckled, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The fear was overwhelming, pressing down on him like a physical force. He wanted to run, to escape the crushing darkness. But then, he remembered Valinthra's words, "You must face your own heart." Aemon closed his eyes, centering himself. He wasn't here to prove himself to the shadows, or even to the dragons. He was here for the people he loved, for the kingdom he had sworn to protect. He was here because it was his duty, and that duty gave him strength. Slowly, he rose to his feet, his grip tightening on his sword. The shadows writhed around him, their whispers growing louder, but Aemon stood firm. "I am worthy," he said, his voice strong and steady. "I will not fail." The darkness recoiled, and in that moment, a figure emerged from the shadows. Tenebris, the dragon of shadows, loomed before him, massive and terrifying. But Aemon didn't falter. "You have passed the test of heart," Tenebris said, his voice deep and resonant. "You are worthy to renew the pact." The shadows dissipated, and the cave filled with light. Aemon let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding, relief flooding through him. When he emerged from the cave, the sky was clear, the sun shining brightly over the mountains. Aemon felt lighter, the weight of the trials behind him. He had done it. He had passed the tests, and the pact would be renewed. As he made his way back to the Dragon Council, Ignathar, Valinthra, and Tenebris awaited him. Together, they performed the ancient rite, binding the dragons and humans in a new pact. Aemon stood at the head of the council, the dragons behind him, ready to face the coming darkness. He had proven his worth, not just to the dragons, but to himself. And now, united, they would stand against whatever evil awaited them. Aemon stood still for a moment, taking in the weight of what had just happened. The trials were over, but the true task was just beginning. The dragons had tested him, pushed him to the brink of his abilities, and now he had the responsibility of renewing the pact that had protected the world for centuries. Ignathar, Valinthra, and Tenebris towered over him, their expressions unreadable, but Aemon could feel the shift in the air, the acknowledgement of his success. "You have proven yourself, knight," Ignathar said, his voice low and rumbling, like distant thunder. "The ancient pact will be renewed, but remember, it is not a promise of eternal peace. It is a bond, forged in mutual respect, that requires both humans and dragons to uphold their end." Aemon nodded, the gravity of Ignathar's words settling over him like a mantle. This was not just about surviving the trials, it was about carrying the weight of this alliance forward, ensuring that both species understood the importance of their connection. He turned to face the three dragons, his chest tightening with the enormity of the moment. "I understand," he said, his voice steady. "I will honor this bond, just as my ancestors did." Valinthra's icy gaze softened slightly. "You are not your ancestors, Sir Aemon. You have passed these trials not because you followed their footsteps, but because you carved your own path. You are worthy in your own right. Tenebris, his shadowy form flickering at the edges of the light, spoke next. The darkness that looms over your world is vast and cunning. It feeds on fear and division. But remember, Night, it is also afraid of what you represent. Unity between dragons and humans has always been its greatest threat. Amon's jaw tightened. He had felt the weight of that darkness in the cave, its insidious whispers clawing at his mind, trying to drag him into despair. But he had resisted, and now he would carry that strength forward. I won't let it divide us, he said, determination burning in his eyes. The dragons exchanged a glance, and then Ignather lowered his massive head toward Amon. We shall stand with you, human, as we once stood with your kind long ago. The pact is renewed. The moment the words left Ignather's mouth, a brilliant light erupted from the ground, swirling around Amon and the dragons. It pulsed with ancient magic, a force older than the mountains themselves, binding them together. Amon felt the magic course through him, filling every fiber of his being. He had never experienced anything like it, a connection not just with the dragons, but with the world around him. It was as if he could feel the very heartbeat of the earth, the sky, and the mountains, all woven together by this ancient pact. When the light faded, the air was still once again, but Amon knew everything had changed. The pact was not just a promise of peace, it was a living bond, a force that would protect them all if upheld with honor and respect. You carry the weight of this bond now, Valinthra said, her voice softer but no less powerful. But remember, you do not carry it alone. Amon nodded, feeling the truth of her words. He wasn't alone. The dragons were with him, and so too were the people of his kingdom. This alliance, this unity, was stronger than any darkness that might come their way. With the pact renewed, Amon returned to his kingdom, the journey back feeling lighter than before, though no less urgent. The darkness that the dragons had warned of still loomed, and he knew it wouldn't be long before it made its move. As he approached the capital, he could see the tension etched on the faces of the people. They had heard the rumors, felt the unease growing in the land. But now, Amon carried with him a renewed hope, a strength forged in the trials of the dragons. When he arrived at the palace, the council of elders awaited him, their eyes filled with questions. Amon stood before them, his armor still dusted with ash and ice from the trials, and he spoke of the renewed pact. He described the trials he had faced, the dragons he had met, and the bond that now linked their two worlds once more. The council listened in silence, their expressions shifting from doubt to awe as they realized what had been accomplished. Then the dragons will fight with us, one of the elders said, his voice heavy with relief. They will, Amon confirmed. But we must be ready. The darkness that threatens us isn't just a force to be battled with swords and flames. It's a force that thrives on fear and division. We must stand united, or we will fall. The elder nodded solemnly. You have done well, Sir Amon. The kingdom owes you a great debt. Amon shook his head. This isn't about me. It's about all of us. The pact is only as strong as those who uphold it. The days that followed were filled with preparation. Amon worked tirelessly with the council and the dragon emissaries to strengthen their defenses. Word of the renewed pact spread quickly, and soon the people of the kingdom began to rally. There was fear, of course. The looming darkness was a threat unlike anything they had faced before, but there was also hope. The alliance with the dragons was a symbol of that hope, a beacon in the growing night. As the days passed, Amon's mind often returned to the trials he had faced in the mountains. Each test had pushed him to his limits, but it was the final trial, the trial of heart, that had left the deepest mark. The darkness in the cave of shadows had been a reflection of his own fears, his own doubts. And though he had conquered it, he knew that fear would always be there, lurking in the corners of his mind. But now, he also knew that he had the strength to face it. The night the darkness came was like none other. The sky, usually clear and dotted with stars, was shrouded in an inky blackness that seemed to swallow all light. The air was thick with tension, and Aemon could feel the weight of it pressing down on the city. He stood on the battlements, his sword at his side, watching as the first tendrils of shadow crept toward the walls, but he wasn't alone. Beside him stood the dragons, Ignather, Valinthra, and Tenebris, their massive forms towering over the soldiers below. The sight of them filled the men with awe and courage, a reminder that they were not fighting this battle alone. The darkness surged, a wave of shadow that crashed against the city like a tidal wave. Aemon raised his sword, shouting commands to the soldiers, but his heart pounded in his chest. This was it, the moment they had been preparing for. The darkness had come, and now they had to stand against it. The battle was fierce. The darkness was unlike any enemy they had faced before, formless and relentless. It seeped through the cracks in the walls, twisting and warping everything it touched. But the dragons fought back with fire, ice, and shadow, their power a force of nature that cut through the darkness like a blade. Aemon fought alongside them, his sword gleaming in the dim light. He had trained for this, had faced the trials of the dragons, but nothing could have prepared him for the sheer terror of battling an enemy that seemed unstoppable. But he pressed on, his heart filled with the knowledge that he was not fighting for himself, he was fighting for his people, for the dragons, for the bond that united them all. Hours passed, the battle raging on, but slowly, the tide began to turn. The dragons, with their immense power, pushed the darkness back, inch by inch. Aemon fought with everything he had, his body screaming with exhaustion, but he didn't stop. He couldn't stop. Not until the battle was won, and then, as the first rays of dawn broke through the blackened sky, the darkness began to retreat. It hissed and writhed, unwilling to surrender, but it had been weakened, its power broken by the unity of the dragons and humans. As the light spread across the land, the darkness melted away, leaving only the broken remnants of its attack behind. Aemon stood on the battlefield, his chest heaving, his sword stained with the remnants of shadow. Around him, the dragons let out triumphant roars, their voices echoing across the mountains. The battle was over. They had won, but Aemon knew that the darkness would return one day. It was a force that could never be truly destroyed, only beaten back. And when that day came, the pact between dragons and humans would be their greatest weapon. As the sun rose higher, casting a golden glow over the kingdom, Aemon felt a sense of peace wash over him. He had faced his fears, passed the trials, and renewed a bond that would protect the world for generations to come. He wasn't just a knight anymore. He was a guardian of the pact, a symbol of the unity between dragons and humans. And no matter what darkness came their way, he knew they would face it together.